Tito was having a very bad day, and it was still only 5 a.m. He was driving to the docks, speeding along the highway in the dark, desperate not to be late for work. Tito didn't exactly love his job, but he needed the money. His true life's passion was caring for the exotic reptiles that he kept in the house he shared with his cousin, just outside Palm Beach, Florida. Providing for dozens of venomous pythons, giant anacondas, and hungry monitor lizards wasn't cheap. He couldn't risk losing his job, so even though he felt completely heartbroken at the moment, not to mention nauseous and feverish, he pulled off the highway into the catering warehouse parking lot and hurried inside to clock in. Sweat dripped from his forehead into his eyes as he pulled on his apron, hairnet, and rubber gloves. He winced as the glove rubbed up against the 2 puncture marks on his left wrist. The skin there was hot, swollen, and bruising more every minute. Tito felt the urge to vomit and held it in, swallowing hard and marching over to join his colleagues at the tanks. They got to work, scooping live lobsters out of the tanks, snapping rubber bands around their claws, then placing them into plastic crates for the morning delivery. Tito found it difficult to concentrate. Tears came into his eyes. 1 hour earlier, he had awoken to the sound of a dog whimpering, and stumbling from his bedroom, he had discovered a waking nightmare. His beloved Burmese python, Shakira, had escaped her shelf during the night. His cousin's pit bull must have found the snake in the living room. It looked like a vicious and bloody battle had transpired on the carpet. The dog was dying in the corner, whining and bleeding from his neck. Tito didn't care about the pit bull. He didn't like mammals very much. But his python, his beloved Shakira, she lay twisted and still, her graceful body punctured by claws and teeth, her beautiful head torn off and tossed aside under the coffee table. Tito had burst into tears as he fell to his knees on the carpet and gingerly lifted up the snake's severed head in his trembling hands. That's when it happened. The head twitched, snapping open and shut in one final bout of life. Tito felt the fangs sink into his wrist. A fiery pain shot through his arm. He spasmed, dropping the head, which thudded onto the carpet. Then he hurried into the bathroom to inject himself with antivenom. His arm still hurt like crazy, his muscles tense and twitching, but he would be all right. It was Shakira he was thinking of now. He felt terrible for dropping her head like that, but he hadn't done it on purpose. Just like he was sure she hadn't meant to bite him. Just misunderstandings between soulmates. At the lobster tank, he wiped his tears away with a sleeve and shook himself back to the present. He lifted out the last of the lobsters and set it down with the others, then picked up the top of the crate. There was a logo on the plastic bin, a large ship on a stylized wave, and the name Joyride Cruises beside it. As he glanced down at the image, Tito felt a sudden wave of nausea pass through him. His stomach clenched, his throat opening involuntarily as vomit tried to force itself up and out. He closed his lips and clenched his jaws shut, falling forward onto his knees as his mouth filled with hot, acidic liquid. He spasmed, trying to hold it in, but a spray of vomit escaped his lips, dripping across the lobsters in the crate beneath him. Tito straightened up, swallowing painfully and wiping his chin. He looked around. He didn't think anyone had noticed, thank goodness. When he bent down to place the lid on the crate, he noticed something strange. His vomit was pitch black and frothy, hissing hotly as it seemed to burn the shells of the skittering lobsters. Maybe the venom of the dead snake had affected his body more than he thought. He quickly closed the lid and loaded the crate onto the pallet next to the others. A minute later, the pallet was carried by a forklift out of the warehouse to be loaded into one of the huge cruise ships at the dock. Tito, meanwhile, was feeling worse and worse as the sun rose and the day began. Eddie soon stumbled into the warehouse bathroom, spewing black vomit across the walls of a stall before toppling forward next to the toilet. He lay twitching for a few minutes, thinking about Shakira. Then his body went limp, and his mouth fell open. He was dead, though being dead didn't stop his tongue from starting to quiver, or his muscles from twitching into action, forcing his body upright in the bathroom stall, rigid, twitching, dead eyes empty, stomach growling. Joyride Cruise Lines was proud to offer the perfect weekend getaway for kids of all ages, boasting full amenities for the whole family. Passengers could enjoy the spacious swimming pool and water slide in the grand central courtyard of the cruise ship, or partake in delicious dining in 5 restaurants and 2 bars. In the evenings, fun and laughter could be found in the onboard theater, where a comedy improv troupe performed each night. Joyride's vacation package for a 3-day trip from the port of Palm Beach to Grand Bahama Island and back was advertised as relaxation like you've never experienced before. But they had only been to sea for a few hours, and already, Eddie was pretty sure he had never been so stressed out in all his life.
Mason, give me that beer. Where the hell did you even get this?
13-year-old Mason shrugged from where he sat on the edge of the pool with a few other teenagers.
Chill, Eddie. We're at sea. Floridian drinking age doesn't apply here, bruh. It's maritime law. Look it up. That's not a thing, smartass,
Eddie grumbled, grabbing the bottle from his stepson.
Ooh, I'm gonna tell my mom you said that. Ooh, I'm gonna tell your mom that you were drinking.
Mason squinted up angrily at Eddie, who squinted down angrily at him.
Truce,
offered the teenager, holding up a fist. Eddie moved forward for a fist bump, but Mason retracted his hand and held up his middle finger instead. The other boys laughed. Eddie rolled his eyes and walked off to throw away the beer, though as soon as he knew Mason wasn't looking, he made a beeline for an empty lounge chair instead, drinking the beer in one long chug. He collapsed into the chair with an exasperated sigh.
You look at the end of your rope already,
said a man in the next lounger.
We still got 2.5 days to go.
Eddie sniffed a laugh.
Don't remind me. Hey, is this chair free? You're not saving it for anybody. Nah, you're good. Sit and relax, bud. Soak up the sun. I'm Big Mike, by the way.
Big Mike extended a big, hairy hand at the end of a hugely muscled arm. Eddie shook the hand rather timidly.
Eddie, nice to meet you. You a bodybuilder, Mike? Firefighter. Oh, nice. You?
Eddie looked down at his own skinny arms.
Not a firefighter, I'll tell you that. Nah, I am a junior sales coordinator for the world's most boring company. The hours are long, and the pay is shit.
Big Mike laughed. Over by the pool, Eddie watched Mason jump to his feet, and, in an attempt to impress some nearby girls, began twerking comedically. Eddie shook his head and went for another sip of beer, forgetting that it was empty.
I am in hell right now,
he mumbled under his breath, pulling out a pack of nicotine gum and popping 2 into his mouth.
I thought parents are supposed to embarrass their kids, not the other way around.
Mike laughed again.
You just have the one? Nah, that's Mason. He's 13. He's got a sister, Leah. She's 16. She's around here, somewhere. Probably shooting up heroin with some joyride bartender by now.
Mike nodded sympathetically.
I know the feeling. We've got 4, though 3 are out of the house now. Crazy how life flies by. One minute, your kids are these cute little angels. The next, they've grown up into total assholes.
Eddie chuckled.
Yeah, well, I wasn't there for the angel part.
Mike shot him a quizzical look, so Eddie explained.
I've kind of been in their lives for the past couple years, but as of a few weeks ago, I am now officially the new stepdad. Hey, congrats! Thank you, I guess. And where's your lovely new bride at?
Eddie groaned.
Miami, giving a big work presentation. And she sent you off on a weekend cruise with 2 teenagers? Well, her work thing came up last minute. And like an idiot, I said I'd be happy to take them, no problem. How hard could it be, right?
Above the sounds of families in the pool, the deck speaker over their heads came on with a little chime.
Attention, Joyride passengers. We hope you are all having a tremendous time today as we embark on our fun-filled voyage. Just a quick reminder, if you are feeling unwell, you are welcome to come down to our medical facilities for assistance. And let's make sure we're all being careful, washing our hands, avoiding sneezing on other passengers, that sort of thing. Finally, we have a few reports of some erratic behavior on board. So please make sure and pace yourself on those cocktails, and report any disturbances to the crew. Thank you!
Big Mike shook his head.
Sounds like somebody's got the shits already. Yeah, and it sounds like somebody else is already shit-faced.
Mike laughed a final time as he stood and stretched. He looked even more massive on his feet, a muscled statue almost 7 feet tall. He could probably crush Eddie's skull with one hand.
Hey, listen, don't be too hard on yourself, Eddie. Or your kids, for that matter,
said Mike, grabbing up his towel.
You'll all survive the weekend, I've no doubt. Guess we'll see. Yes, indeed. Now then, I'm gonna hit up that seafood restaurant over there and eat about 20 pounds of lobster. So if you'll excuse me.
Nice talking to you, Mike. See you around. As the huge firefighter marched off for an early lunch, Eddie stretched out on the lounge chair, wondering if he could get his anxious mind to chill out for a bit. The cruise itself was actually really nice, he had to admit. The weather was great, the boat was big and clean, although their cabin on the top deck was smaller than it had looked in the pictures. Eddie hated the idea of sleeping in the same room as the kids. They'd probably try and prank him during the night. Maybe put his hand in warm water to make him piss himself. Did that even work? He didn't put that past Leah. She hated Eddie with the fiery passion only a 16-year-old could feel. Eddie didn't blame her. He didn't even take it personally, or at least he tried not to. It wasn't easy being 16. By that age, you had come to realize how fucking hard and unfair life is, but you still didn't have the freedom to do anything about it. All the knowledge, none of the control. That's what it felt like. Maybe he should tell Leah the truth, that when she got to be in her 40s, like him, she'd still wake up most mornings feeling helpless and depressed. Like no matter how hard you tried, it was still a battle to make it through each day, to keep going, to keep fighting. That would be great parenting, wouldn't it? Chuckling at the thought, he watched as Mason and his new friends ran around the pool to the diving boards at the deep end. Mason went careening off the high dive, squealing like an idiot, and landed in an impressively loud belly flop.
Oof, that must have really hurt,
Eddie thought, smiling ear to ear. The speaker chimed again.
Hello again, Joyride passengers. Seriously, people, let's all take it easy on the drinks and the fighting, okay? I know the cocktails are delish, but don't go overboard with them and... Oops, that was a terrible metaphor to use. Shit, I'm so sorry. And I just said shit, didn't I? Sorry again, Oh, Jesus Christ, I'm gonna get fired, aren't I?
Around him, several people chuckled, but Eddie sat up. That announcement was weird. They were only a few hours from port. How many passengers could have gotten out of control already? What was the crew so worried about? He stood up beside the chair, looking around at the bustling main deck. Kids running and slipping, moms in bikinis, dads in Hawaiian shirts. His eyes traveled up the corkscrewing yellow water slide that began up on deck 6. Then he looked up and around at all 10 rectangular layers of balconies that overlooked this central courtyard. Everything seemed in order, but then, why did Eddie have a creeping feeling that something was not right? A crew member passed by, stacking trash and dishes onto a tray. Eddie held out his empty beer bottle.
Everything going okay today?
Asked Eddie.
Those announcements were kind of weird.
The crew member shrugged and took the bottle.
Probably just the usual. Couple of stomach aches, some drunken brawls. Nothing too crazy. I hope you're right.
Eddie left the pool and walked through a hall that led to a wraparound promenade that encircled the ship. His hand moved automatically to his left pocket, and his fingers felt the lighter inside, but he hadn't brought any cigarettes on the trip. He had been trying to quit since the wedding day, as a gift to his tobacco-hating wife. That had been a dumb idea. The timing was all wrong. Too many changes at the same time, too many new challenges. Helping himself with another piece of nicotine gum instead, he leaned against the railing and stared out at the Atlantic around them. The ocean was flat and silver, glinting in the sunlight. Some clouds due south. No sight of any land. Eddie had always liked the idea of being out at sea, like the sailors of old, out in the blissful quiet, away from the bustling shore. But he had always been too busy or too broke to make the dream happen. Now here he was. But the view didn't look peaceful to him. Honestly, it made Eddie feel kinda trapped, caged in. With the kids in the pool and the smiling crew, he couldn't leave if he wanted to. He didn't like that. He glanced down and to the right. There were two large yellow lifeboats attached just outside the railing, on heavy cables. That sight brought him a little comfort. They looked pretty cool too, not like the lifeboats back in the olden days of the Titanic. These lifeboats were tubular, with steel roofs and engines and everything. He spit out his wad of chewed-up gum, watching it fall past the lifeboats and disappear into the waves far below. From somewhere on a deck above him, Eddie heard a woman scream. He flinched and turned, looking up at the cabin windows, though of course there was nothing to see from here. He heard another scream, a man's this time. Jesus, what was going on up there? Eddie walked quickly back through the hall to the pool. A lot of parents had turned to look up at the balconies in search of who was screaming. But most of the kids and teenagers in the pool were too engrossed in their games, their cannonball leaps, and their pathetic flirting to notice.
Mason!
Eddie called out, waving to his stepson, who was now racing another boy across the deep end of the pool.
Mason! Come out for a second. I'll get your towel. Why? Just come out, damn it!
Grumbling, Mason swam to the edge of the pool and climbed out. Other parents were ordering their kids out too, as more screaming issued from the decks overhead.
What is that?
Asked Mason, accepting a towel from Eddie.
No idea. Some drunk asshole probably grabbed a kitchen knife and is threatening people. Something like that. I don't know. But I think we should get your sister and go to the room for a bit, until the drama dies down. Do you know where Leah is? Eddie put an arm around Mason's shoulder as they navigated through the crowd, heading toward the glass-doored elevators. Mason pushed his arm off. How would I know where she is? Probably with some fuckboy in a back room giving him a... Nope, not another word, Mason. I am begging you not to finish that sentence.
A door banged open nearby, startling them. He looked over as a man with wild hair and a lobster bib over his bare chest stumbled out into the sunlight, head bowed, legs stiff. Eddie watched the man move drunkenly toward the pool, twitching and groaning and hissing.
Ooh,
said a mom with a Karen haircut, sitting beside the pool.
Is this all part of the comedy improv? I do love a bit of audience participation.
She rose, cleared her throat theatrically, and approached the twitching man.
Hello!
The man snarled and pounced, tackling her. She screamed, writhing and fighting on the ground. Eddie backed away with Mason, as several men hurried to pull the man off of her.
That's it, we're out,
said Eddie, turning and pulling Mason beside him. They took 2 steps, then glass shattered over their heads. Eddie grabbed Mason and pulled him backward as shards of glass and drops of blood fell onto the deck right in front of them.
Holy shit!
Eddie shouted, looking up to see a woman slumped over the broken railing of a balcony a couple of floors up, arms flailing as someone else attacked them. On the main deck, families began to scream and run, parents tugging children by the arms, fathers shoving past one another, mothers lifting toddlers to their chests as they hurried to gather in a chaotic crowd at the elevators. The fight over the Karen by the pool had turned into a frenzy of snarling grunts and swinging limbs. Eddie snatched at the towel around Mason's neck and tugged, pulling him out of the crowd and toward the stairs instead.
Hey! Ow! Don't pull me like that, bitch! Shut up, Mason. Come on.
They ran up the stairs to deck 2, spun around the corner, and hurried up that stairwell toward deck 3.
Where did you last see Leah? Did she say where she was going?
Mason halted halfway up the stairs, clutching at his side. The kid was out of shape, but then so was Eddie. Eddie wiped sweat from his cheeks.
I don't know,
panted Mason.
She was talking about singers and concerts and shit with some Chad wannabe. I think they were gonna try and get into a bar or something. Which one? The tiki bar with the coconuts? Or the classy bar with the red carpet? How should I know? And that was like half an hour ago. She could be anywhere by now.
Eddie nodded, trying to think straight.
I don't know what's happening,
he finally said, starting up the stairs again.
But I'm taking you to our room right now. Then I'll find Leah, I guess.
They turned around the next stairwell corner to ascend to deck 5. But Mason screamed and lurched suddenly sideways, his bare feet slipping. Eddie reached out and caught him, just as a body tumbled down the stairs past them.
Oh my God!
Eddie shouted, turning to face the woman sprawled on the landing below them.
Are you okay, miss?
The woman was young, maybe in her 20s, skinny, wearing a striped bikini. There were bloody injuries on both her arms and legs. Her long blonde hair was plastered over her face with more blood. Eddie took a step down toward her, but Mason snatched his arm.
Don't! There's something wrong with her. Look!
The woman lay on the landing, her bleeding limbs rigid and twitching, her head snapping from side to side. From her mouth came wet grunts and groans.
I think you're right,
said Eddie. He and Mason backed up a few stairs, gazing at the twitching woman. She went quiet, reaching out a trembling arm to grab at the bottom stair. Her fingers splayed out like the legs on a spider. Then her tongue stuck out from her curtain of bloody hair, flicking and making a crazy hissing sound.
What's she doing?
Asked Mason. She snatched at the stair with her other hand, pulling herself up a few feet, head cocked, face hidden. She began to crawl up toward them, moaning, hissing, reaching out for them, legs kicking wildly to propel her. Eddie and Mason spun and raced up the stairs to decks 5, 6, 7. Breathless and now clutching a stitch in his own side, Eddie cautioned a glance around the banister at the hall that ran around the balcony. There had to be 24 people there, running and slipping in puddles of blood. Some of them were acting like the man by the pool and the woman on the stairs, moving drunkenly, groaning and hissing, pouncing on anyone that came too close, and were they biting them?
What the actual fuck?
Eddie moaned. He looked up. Their cabin was way up on deck 10. 3 more flights of stairs. He took a deep breath.
We got this. But what about Leah? Well, maybe. Maybe she's already in the room.
There was more and more screaming now, coming from all over the cruise ship. There was the sound of doors slamming, glass breaking, and splashing in the pool below. Another body came tumbling past them on the stairwell, smearing blood across the steps.
Hurry, Mason!
They ran, panting, and made it to deck 10. They rushed around the corner into their hall, balcony on their left, cabin doors on their right. The hall was mostly empty. There was one family ahead of them, 2 moms with 3 little kids in tow, who rushed into their own room. Beyond them, an old man came into view, rocking side to side with his arms stiff in front of him. As the other family slammed the door shut, the old man's head snapped to the side with a grunt. His eyes locked with Eddie's. There was something wrong with his eyes. Eddie swallowed. Their room was halfway down the hall, between them and the twitching man, maybe 50 feet. He slid his hand into the pocket of his shorts and felt the cold plastic of the room keycard beside his lighter.
We're gonna run for it,
he said to Mason, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder and squeezing. For once, Mason didn't push Eddie's hand away.
Now!
They ran, bare feet slapping the carpet, eyes fixed on the old man, who began to limp crazily toward them, mouth open, tongue stretched out and flicking in the air.
Oh God, oh God, oh God!
Eddie made it to the door and shoved the keycard against the handle. The light was red. Mason pounded on the door with both fists.
Leah! Leah, let us in!
The man came closer, breath hissing, limbs twitching. Eddie removed the keycard and placed it against the handle again. The light went green. He threw open the door and shoved Mason inside, diving in after him and swinging the door shut. A liver-spotted arm reached inside just before it closed, the door smashing against its elbow with a crunch. Eddie gasped and pushed harder, but the old man on the other side wouldn't give up and howled, an inhuman grunt of ravenous hunger. Eddie stared through the gap in the door. The man's face was pale and gaunt, the flicking tongue dark and bloody, and his eyes, they were red with black slits for pupils. Eddie froze, tensed against the door, unable to move, to do anything at all. He heard Mason grunt and a heavy object whisked past his face and slammed into the reaching arm, knocking the old man backward into the hall. Eddie shoved the door shut and quickly locked the handle in the latch lock. Backing up, chest rising and falling in desperate breaths, he looked over at Mason. Mason was holding the room's complimentary ironing board in both hands. There was blood on its tip. He dropped it onto the carpet and turned.
Leah? Leah?
Eddie looked around into the ensuite bathroom, then checked the closet. Leah wasn't there, though he found her favorite necklace on the bathroom counter. He put the necklace in his pocket, just in case.
She's not here,
said Mason, trying not to cry.
So, she's out there? With them? We have to find her. We have to get her.
Eddie nodded.
I know, but I don't know how. What are they? What's wrong with those people, Eddie? Beats me. Some kind of infection, probably. Like rabies or something. That didn't look like rabies. No, it didn't.
Mason ran to the bedside table and grabbed the lamp there.
What are you doing?
Eddie asked, as Mason unscrewed the top and removed the lampshade, then the light bulb.
Making a weapon, obviously.
He wrenched the cord from the back of the lamp.
You can use the ironing board if you want, unless it's too heavy for you.
Eddie frowned. Sure, he wasn't exactly a prime physical specimen in the muscles department, but hadn't he just prevented that infected man from getting inside? As if reading his thoughts, Mason raised an eyebrow and said,
That old guy was like 100 years old. I could have taken him. And I did, basically. Point taken. You did good, Mason. I'm proud of you.
Yeah, no shit,
grumbled Mason, but his cheeks blushed.
But I'll take the lamp. You're staying in this room, period. I'll find Leah. How? You don't even know who she is.
The speaker in their room chimed to life, followed by the sounds of muffled arguing and a door slamming. Then they heard a man clearing his throat.
Attention all passengers. This is Captain Ramsey speaking. It appears we have some sort of hysteria affecting a number of people on board. I'm ordering all guests to go to their cabins immediately and lock their doors until further instructions. I have made contact with the Coast Guard and I'm turning the ship now to return to port. Please make your way in an orderly fashion to your rooms. Do not panic.
Something crashed against their cabin door, making them both jump. Outside in the hall, they could hear the old man on the other side, groaning, whining, fingernails scraping against the door.
I repeat, do not panic. Let's just all stay calm and get back to Palm Beach. We can do this.
There was another bout of muffled argument from the ship's bridge before the intercom went off. Eddie swallowed. He didn't find the captain's words very reassuring.
You better not be thinking of following that order,
said Mason angrily.
If you stay in here and leave Leah out there, my mom will slaughter your skinny ass. Of course I'm not going to leave Leah alone out there. And don't talk about my ass.
He leaned down and picked up the bloodied ironing board. It was a better weapon than nothing. Mason marched up next to him, wielding the lamp like a bat. Eddie nodded over at him.
That's good thinking. You're one of the best pitchers on your team, right? How are you at the plate?
Mason lowered the lamp a few inches, looking suspicious.
How'd you know I'm a good pitcher?
Eddie grinned.
I know you've always told your mom you didn't want her awkward boyfriend at any of your games, but that doesn't mean I don't pay attention. Your team's pretty good. 8-2 last season, right?
He nodded.
Yeah, but I'm not a great hitter. That's okay, I wasn't either. I usually played catcher. Only position I was any good at,
said Eddie, turning back to the door.
Okay, you're coming with me. We're gonna move quickly and quietly. The infection spreads through bites, I think. So whatever happens, do not let yourself get bitten. We'll check the bar on deck 8 first, then the one on the main deck. After that, we have to get to the lifeboats. The lifeboats? Why? I thought we'd just stay in our room until we get back to port.
Eddie shook his head.
They're not taking us back to port. But the captain said... He lied. The Coast Guard won't want to risk the infection spreading to the mainland. They'll probably send a team to intercept us in the water. Maybe harbor the ship at one of the islands up ahead. And if they don't think they can contain it, who knows what they'll do to us. And how would you possibly know all that?
Eddie turned and shrugged.
Because that's what I would do. Besides, look out the window. Those clouds were in the south before this all happened. They're still there. We're not turning.
Mason glanced out the window.
Huh. So you're like, kinda smart? Well, your mom didn't just marry me for my riz. Don't say riz, Eddie. It's cringe. Noted.
Eddie unlocked the door.
You ready?
Mason nodded. Eddie threw open the door. The old man lurched at them from the other side, arms outstretched, hissing and grunting. Eddie screamed and drove the ironing board hard into his chest, forcing the infected man backward. They careened across the hall to the balcony, the old man crashing against the railing. Eddie shifted the ironing board upward, shoving at the man's neck, and with a heavy grunt, he pushed him over the railing. Mason ran out and leaned over the railing to watch as the body tumbled down and smashed against the main deck, shattering a lounger and adding to the already chaotic scene below them. Eddie leaned to look too. All around the pool, people were running, fighting and screaming. There were bodies in the pool too. Some were still and floating. As they watched, one of the infected tripped and fell in the pool, writhing and sinking out of sight.
The infected can't swim,
said Eddie.
That's good to know. Come on.
They turned. The hall was empty, but there were noises coming from the nearest stairwell. Someone grunting, but it sounded strange, high-pitched, almost like a wounded animal. Eddie held the ironing board out in front of him and inched around the corner. The stairs were bloody, but the only person he saw was a woman, dead, with her head smashed in, lying halfway down. There was something small on the stair beside her, making the noise. A baby, swaddled in a bloody towel, twitching and groaning in its little voice.
Don't step too close to it,
said Eddie. As they made their way down to deck 9, the hall there had seen a lot more action than on 10. There were bodies everywhere, some twitching, but none upright and attacking on their own yet. Eddie hurried around the corner to the next stairwell and found himself facing an old woman hurrying up toward them. He reacted on instinct, swinging the ironing board into her face.
Good Lord!
She shouted, falling backwards down the stairs.
Ah, shit!
Said Eddie.
Sorry, ma'am!
As the old woman landed in a heap on the landing, a snarling boy leapt out and pounced onto her, biting her neck as she screamed and writhed. Eddie and Mason ran down the stairs, rushing around the woman and the infected boy, then looked down the hall at the open doors of the bar on deck 8. They charged over and ran inside, closing the doors quietly behind them. The bar was dim and empty, stools toppled, speakers still playing some big band music from the 1940s to set the scene.
Leah!
Called Mason in a loud whisper.
Are you in here?
There was a heavy pause, the music playing, muted voices screaming outside, then...
Mason?
Mason dropped the lamp and ran around the corner, Eddie a step behind him. Eddie let out a relieved sigh and lowered his ironing board as he saw Leah crouched behind the bar, her eyeliner smeared from crying, an older teen boy sitting next to her. Mason lunged and threw his arms around his sister.
Are you okay?
Asked Eddie in a whisper, crouching behind the bar with them.
Oh God, Leah, your neck. Have you been bitten? What? Oh, this? No, it's from one of them. I'm okay,
she said. Eddie scowled at the red mark on her neck, then looked next to her at the older boy, who extended a hand.
Hello, sir. You must be Leah's stepdad. My name is Patrick. It's a pleasure to... Yeah, I don't give a shit,
said Eddie, turning back to his stepkids.
We have got to get down to the promenade on the main deck to the lifeboats, and fast. I'm sure others will have the same plan. And how are we supposed to do that?
Asked Leah. She turned to Mason.
How's he doing with all this?
Mason shrugged.
Meh, kinda mid.
Eddie rolled his eyes. He began to look around for any weapon better than the ironing board. There wasn't much. Why couldn't the bar's theme have been medieval knights or pirates or something? Eddie set down the ironing board and grabbed a stool instead. He moved cautiously toward the doors. Mason came up behind him, grabbing the lamp again, then Leah, weaponless, and finally Patrick, who had an unopened bottle of gin under one arm. Eddie eyed the bottle and raised an eyebrow.
I can, hit them over the head with the bottle,
Patrick explained.
And later we can drink it. So, dual purpose. See? He's smart,
said Mason. But Eddie caught the glint in his stepson's eye, and the two exchanged a private smile. This Patrick guy was a dumbass. Leah could do better. They both knew it.
Ready?
Asked Eddie, holding the stool in his right hand and raising his left fist toward Mason. Mason gave him a fist bump. Eddie turned to the doors and pulled them open. They moved quietly outside, into the hall, stepping around broken glass and a couple of dead bodies. Eddie couldn't see any infected nearby, so he led them all to the stairwell, then down to deck 7. Still clear, though there was screaming coming from the arcade at that level. Howling voices mingled with the electronic sounds of the games inside. They went down to level 6, and Eddie held up an open hand.
Wait,
he whispered. He looked around the corner. The next stairwell had a dozen bleeding bodies on it, each hissing, chewing noisily. There was no way they could get through them. He looked around at the hall on level 6. The area seemed clear, so he inched forward toward the balcony railing.
What the hell do we do now?
He whispered to himself. He could see the 2 elevators to their left, but both were stopped and full of frightened families caged inside, while infected slammed on the glass doors from the outside. Their only chance was to go right and move around the whole rectangular balcony to the stairs on the other side of level 6. That would mean passing by dozens of rooms, moving past the play center, with its climbing wall and the entrance to the water slide. He turned and waved to the kids to follow. They crept forward behind him, moving along the balcony, turning left, and approaching the play center. There was a kid in a harness, hanging beside the climbing wall, dangling on the cables a couple of yards up, hissing and twitching. His legs were covered in bite marks. Eddie moved faster. As long as there were no infected on the other stairwell, they should be able to get down to level 5, unless...
Eddie, watch out!
Said Mason in a shouted whisper. 2 infected stumbled from a door ahead of them. An older man and woman in matching Jimmy Buffett t-shirts, limbs stiff, dark blood dribbling down their chins. Eddie held up the stool, ready to fight. But another infected stumbled out behind them. Then 2 more. He spun around.
Go back!
But behind the kids, he saw more infected coming toward them from the other side. Half a dozen Joyride crew members, stumbling from the stairwell in their bloodied uniforms, slit pupiled eyes, searching for prey.
Fuck this, bro!
Shouted Patrick. He shoved Leah sideways as he ran past her toward the water slide. Eddie watched as the young man turned and, still holding onto his bottle of gin, dove headfirst into the slide.
What a dick,
said Mason.
Agreed,
said Eddie.
But there's no other way to go. We can't fight them. There are too many. But there are infected down in the pool. But they can't swim. We have to risk it. Hurry, kids. Follow the fuck boy.
They ran with Eddie to the slide. Mason tossed aside the lamp and launched himself headfirst into it. Leah climbed in after, hands shaking.
But what if... There's no time, Leah,
Eddie called, throwing the stool at the nearest infected and jumping into the slide, kicking Leah down and sliding in after her. They flew down the corkscrewing slide, gagging on the splashing water, vision spinning, Leah's screams echoing around them. Then they were spewed out into sunlight at the deep end of the pool. Eddie saw a fleeting image of dozens of infected around the pool. Then he was plunged into the chlorinated water. White bubbles blurred his vision. He saw Leah beside him, arms flailing, and caught her wrist in the water. He started to swim up when something seized onto his right ankle. Eddie screamed and looked down. They were infected at the bottom of the pool, wriggling in slow motion, reaching up with grasping fingers. He kicked himself free and swam up, head breaking the surface and gasping for breath.
Where's Mason? Here!
Shouted Mason, treading water a few feet away and now swimming over to join them in the center of the pool.
Keep your legs up, kids. Try to float on the surface. They're underneath us. Eddie, they're also all around us,
said Leah. Eddie treaded water and turned in place. There were dozens of infected on each side of the pool, groaning and reaching, red eyes gazing hungrily, tongues stretched out and hissing.
We're trapped,
whined Leah.
Where's Patrick? Who? The fuckboy,
clarified Mason.
He, tried to climb out. I think there's a piece of him over there, and another piece over there. It was pretty gross.
Eddie looked in the snarling crowd for any break, anywhere to fight their way through. There was nothing. He looked around them in the water. There were bits of broken chairs floating around them, a punctured beach ball, a few bodies, and...
Perfect!
Eddie snatched up the bottle of gin Patrick had been carrying. Taking in a deep breath to inflate his stomach, Eddie tilted to float on his back and cracked open the bottle's seal.
If you're having a shot,
said Mason,
can we have some too?
Eddie poured some of the bottle out, then looked around again.
I need something dry. A rag. Some cloth. Do you guys see anything like that? Here,
said Mason, grabbing a hair ribbon from the back of a female corpse's head.
Part of this is still dry. Can you use it? Maybe.
Eddie shoved half the ribbon into the open bottle.
What are you doing? You're 13, Mason. You don't know a Molotov cocktail when you see one? What, are they not a weapon in Fortnite? But how are you going to light it?
Asked Leah. Eddie reached down under the water to his shorts pocket and pulled out his cigarette lighter.
With this, and they say smoking kills.
The lighter was wet, and it almost took 20 tries before anything but sparks came out. But eventually, Eddie made a little flame and set it against the ribbon.
Come on, come on, come on. And yep, we got fire, baby. Okay, listen up, guys. I'm gonna throw it right there, at the infected on that corner. That should make them scatter. Then we have to fight our way through. There's a hallway on the other side, right there, that leads to the promenade and the lifeboats. Got it? Good. Stay behind me and stay together.
Eddie adjusted himself in the water, careful to keep his treading legs from getting too deep, and looked for the best spot to throw the bottle. The infected at the corner were huddled densely and shifting side to side, arms extended. Taking in a breath and holding it, he tossed the bottle up and into the center of the crowd. They heard the bottle clunk against someone's head, then a smash of glass and a whoosh of fire. The infected howled, stumbling and crashing into each other as flames licked up their twitching bodies.
Now!
Eddie, Mason, and Leah swam to the edge of the pool and pulled themselves out. There was blood on the deck, broken glass, and flames everywhere, but they ran in a line, Eddie in front, bashing aside bodies as they hurried through the fiery crowd, then dashed through the hall. Pain shot through both of Eddie's bare feet from cuts and burns, but he ran on, tugging the kids behind him, turning the corner onto the ship's wraparound promenade. It was still there, 50 feet from them and harnessed to the side of the cruise ship. A long yellow lifeboat. Another family was already there. The dad, helping his own kids on board.
Wait for us!
Eddie called out, running toward them.
Then hurry up! I'm lowering it down!
The dad threw himself into the lifeboat, and a second later, little engines on the boat purred into action, and the lifeboat began to slowly lower on its cables. Eddie got to the break in the railing. The lifeboat was already a few feet down.
You first, Mason! Get on!
Mason jumped down and through the lifeboat's open door, landing with the crash inside it.
Now you, Leah! Leah? Leah!
He turned and saw that Leah was no longer on her feet, but had been snatched by two hands, huge hands, and pulled backward. Her body slammed into the deck. The infected man on top of her was massive, muscled and hairy, with bulging eyes and a lobster bib. Big Mike.
No, no, no!
Eddie ran back to them, leaning to drive his shoulder into Mike. but the giant infected man didn't even budge. Big Mike groaned and lowered his head toward Leah, struggling under him. Opening his wide mouth, teeth bared and tongue hissing. Eddie grabbed the man's head in both hands and pushed upward, but it was like pushing a boulder. He shoved harder, every muscle in his body tense, his bloody feet sliding backward on the deck. He couldn't do it. He couldn't save her. Behind them, they heard arguing in the lifeboat, then a pop and a sizzle like a firework.
Eddie, catch!
Eddie looked over, just as a red stick with a blazing end flew up from the lifeboat and over the railing toward him. Still pushing against Mike's head with his left hand, Eddie reached up with his right hand and caught the emergency flare in his fist. Gritting his teeth, Eddie reached down and pushed the blazing flare between Big Mike's open jaws and shoved it hard into his throat. Big Mike spasmed, throwing himself backward off of Leah, twitching side to side. Flames licked out of Mike's mouth, across his cheeks into his red eyes. Eddie helped Leah to her feet and pulled her back to the railing. But the lifeboat was too low, almost to the water now. If they jumped, they'd land right on top of its hard metal roof. They wouldn't make it.
Wait,
Eddie told Leah, who started to cry.
We just have to wait a few seconds, Leah, for the lifeboat to move out of the way. Then we'll jump into the water. There's no time,
sobbed Leah, pointing back at Big Mike, who, though still on fire, was back on his feet and stumbling in a circle.
There is time, Leah.
He took her hand in his.
Trust me, we have time.
From the promenade behind Big Mike, more infected emerged.
Wait, just a little longer.
Below them, the lifeboat landed in the surf, and the cables detached from its upper bow and stern. In its open doorway, Eddie saw Mason looking up at them, panic on his young face.
Eddie!
Screamed Leah. Eddie watched as the infected hurried down the promenade toward them. 20 feet away. 15. 10. In the water, the lifeboat's motor propelled it forward.
Now!
Hand in hand, they jumped. A minute later, hands reached down into the water and pulled Leah up and into the lifeboat. Then they did the same for Eddie. They lay on the riveted steel floor inside, coughing up salt water, hearts pounding in their chests, as the lifeboat's engine rumbled, propelling it away from the cruise ship out into the open water.
Were either of you two bitten?
Shouted the other dad at the controls.
They fucking weren't!
Mason shouted back.
It's all right, Mason.
Eddie panted.
We're not infected. We're safe.
He looked from Mason over to Leah and grinned.
We're all safe.
They moved onto one of the benches and sat, side by side. There were half a dozen other families that must have reached the lifeboat before them, and they filled out most of the rest of the benches, huddled together, whispering, praying, and crying. The dad at the controls seemed to know what he was doing, guiding the craft east, back to Florida. Leah sniffled, then broke down into tears.
Hey,
Eddie said softly.
What's wrong? Are you upset about that Patrick boy? What? No. He was kind of a douche. I mean, I wish he hadn't gotten torn into pieces or whatever, but it isn't that. It's just my favorite necklace. I left it back in our room. We can buy you another stupid necklace, Leah,
said Mason, rolling his eyes.
Actually, we can't. It was exclusive merch from the Found Heaven tour. It was really important to me.
Eddie felt in his pocket.
Yellow teardrop with a black star on it, right?
Leah nodded. He pulled the necklace from his pocket.
I grabbed it for you. I knew it was your favorite.
She looked at him with wide eyes and lips quivering, then threw her arms around his neck.
You're important to me too, Eddie,
she said into his shoulder.
Just Eddie? For a minute there, I thought maybe you would call me Dad. Oh God, no,
said Leah, backing off and shaking her head. Mason shook his head too.
That's super cringe, Eddie. It's way too fast for that. Fair enough,
said Eddie, sighing and leaning back on the bench. His feet were a bloody, burned mess, and every muscle in his body was going to hurt like hell in the morning. He could have really used a cigarette. By the time they reached the Florida coast and maneuvered the lifeboat toward a sandy stretch of beach, the sun was setting. But as they jumped from the open door and swam the final 50 feet to shore, they could see the skyline of Fort Lauderdale hotels rising up before them. There were plumes of smoke amongst the buildings, and a dozen circling police helicopters, and the sound of distant sirens and gunshots and screams. Eddie felt sand under his injured feet and stood in the water, reaching out to either side to take Mason and Leah by the hand and walk out of the splashing tide. The kids pulled close behind him, watching as, further down the beach, hunched figures with stiff limbs and groaning, hissing voices marched in a horde, searching for prey.
Oh my God,
Breathed Leah.
they're here now too? What if they're everywhere? How do we get back to Mom? What do we do?
Eddie straightened up, squeezing their hands, and took a deep breath of the sea air.
We keep going. We keep fighting. Together. That's what we do.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.